Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In the United States, President Biden's climate agenda is under renewed threat from inside his party. Senator Joe Manchin, a key vote to passing any of the president's legislation in Congress, has said he will not support a key item in the president's plan to fight climate change. Our Washington correspondent is live in Washington for us now. Siobhan.
Well, John, Joe Manchin has really thrown a spanner in the works this time. We already knew that he disagreed with the $3.5 trillion price tag of Joe Biden's infrastructure bill. But what we learned this weekend is that he wants to remove the central climate policy within that bill that incentivizes fossil fuel companies, oil and gas companies to go green and punishes them if they do not, without which there is absolutely no chance that America will meet its climate targets. Now, why does Joe Manchin want to do this? Well, he says because he doesn't see the point of incentivizing oil and gas companies to do something where they are already making that transition themselves anyway. But remember, he is also the Democratic senator from the conservative coal state of West Virginia, and he's also the senator who was referred to in a report that we did earlier this summer as the kingmaker by an ExxonMobil lobbyist who was caught on camera saying that Exxon was going to use all its power and influence to nobble lawmakers to try and water down Joe Biden's climate legislation. And here we have Joe Manchin seemingly attempting to do exactly that. Well, I caught up with Senator Manchin earlier today, and I put it to him that he was making life extremely difficult for Joe Biden just a couple of weeks ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, in which Joe Biden wants America to be seen as the leaders. Here's what he said. Senator, we're just weeks away from COP26. What do you say to those who say you're hijacking the president's climate agenda such that he turns up empty-handed to Glasgow?
Not at all. My God, he's got more than anything. And in history,
but he will turn up potentially with nothing because you're saying you disagree with the central plank of his climate legislation.
No, you're just absolutely wrong.
Tell me why.
Well, basically, over $300 million of tax credits. We've done more in the last 10 years than any other nation. We've reduced the amount of coal plants. Basically, he needs to look at China and look at basically India and China, what they have done. But how many coal plants they have now? They're at 6,600 in the world. We only have 500 in America. People need to deal with the facts. And there's more in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's more than ever in the history of our country. So the president's going to go with a full hand. The only thing they want us to do is pay $150 billion for what's already happening, and to give utility plants, $150 billion for what's already transitioning. We've transitioned.
But are they transitioning fast enough?
But what is wrong with the 50%? The goal.
The rest of the world's not. I'm sorry.
But what is the goal of the 50%? 50% reduction in greenhouse gases. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's clear Joe Manchin is making them scared because today the Vice President Kamala Harris is travelling to Lake Mead in Nevada to talk up the president's climate agenda. It's the biggest reservoir in the US, but it's drying up because of the twin effects of the heat and the drought, both of which are exacerbated by climate change. And it's where we also went this weekend to see the impact for ourselves and to attend a climate change denial conference in none other than Sin City, Las Vegas itself. And the climate change people, they would say that they do believe in climate change, but they don't believe that it is man-made. As a report shared with this programme reveals the extent and potential danger of climate disinformation.
If there's one thing that graphically illustrates America's battle with global warming, surely it's this: Lake Mead in Nevada, the biggest reservoir in the United States, feeding more than 25 million people. But look at that white line round the edge. It hasn't been painted in. It's where the water used to be, now dried up by drought and climate change.
Now, the climate deniers would have you believe that the devastating heat here out west is the result of natural fluctuations, but that white line behind me does not lie. Lake Mead has dropped nearly 150 feet since the year 2000, and for the first time ever they've had to declare an official water shortage as the combination of searing heat and drought has taken its toll.
But what happens in Lake Mead doesn't stay in Lake Mead. Just down the road, in the fastest warming city in the country, Las Vegas relies on water to power its round-the-clock consumer culture. But climate certainly isn't top in the minds of the millions who flock here every year.
Are you worried about global warming?
No. I don't think climate change affects anything. It's how Mother Nature just brings climate to us.
The hurricanes are much worse. There's got to be some reason.
Do you believe in climate change?
No.
Why not?
Bullshit.
What do you mean, Elvis?
Climate goes up and down for centuries and millennium. There's no such thing as climate change.
America is at a critical juncture. The majority, like President Biden, believe not to act on climate is gambling with our future. But some seem happy to spin the wheel and push a very different agenda.
The whole notion that we are facing a climate crisis is a delusion.
The voice of the Heartland Institute, a group of climate change deniers hosting a conference here in Sin City.
A complete and accurate representation.
In an era of pandemic and lockdowns where misinformation has sown division, the language of COVID-19 is increasingly being used to spread fear around climate change.
They know they have problems.
In one session, we witnessed attendees trying to discredit the work of the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC.
They know they're lying.
They're assuming what they're supposed to be proving.
Where were the climate attribution studies for the 17-year hurricane drought?
Last question.
And when you're talking about IPCC reports, you know, they're not signed off by a couple of people. It's hundreds of scientists in the world, and the wording for those reports is agreed by almost every country in the world. Granted, you don't all agree with that, but if you don't, how do you account for the increasing severity of forest fires, of droughts, of floods that we're seeing in the world? You're all having a good laugh, but how do you account for these things?
You need to be very precise in what you are alleging.
Guess what we've seen this year? But they're not keen on an alternative view, as I quickly discovered.
You can't measure what's happening in global warming and what happened this year.
That's totally fake science.
What's wrong with more warming?
So, Jenny, who are these guys then, the Heartland Institute, and are they having any significant impact?
What's happened with the pandemic is that there is a very real personal experience that has been shared by millions of people globally that can now be weaponized and capitalized upon to really engender a huge amount of outrage and grievance and fear. And what institutions like the Heartland Institute have been doing for years is to provide that sense of academic rigor, who can then go on to mainstream outlets like Fox News and reach an audience with, you know, exponentially more reach than they ever would have been able to achieve with their own social media footprints.
Where they want to put the elites in charge.
Personified by this man, Mark Morano, a self-styled environmental journalist and regular conservative media pundit who was busy scaremongering when we caught up with him.
Attention, but I don't hear anybody saying
well, then you're not
categorically that we need climate lockdowns. And that is something that you are saying categorically,
but
no one has said that.
climate lockdowns came from a warning from the Gates Fund.
You have co-opted it.
I have not co-opted it. I've heard them talk about Build Back Better. I've heard them say the phrase Great Reset.
Build Back Better is about funding.
Do you deny what the World Economic Forum had said in June of 2020? This is a great opportunity to reset capitalism. COVID is an opportunity for us.
The reason that they're saying to reset capitalism is because of what they
do that all along. But they're using COVID as an example to say, let's now use climate to do the same things that we did with COVID.
The climate crisis.
Jenny King's organisation, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, has studied the rise of climate disinformation, and in a report shared with Channel 4 News, reveals the efforts made to push one phrase in particular, climate lockdown, into mainstream discourse.
So we've been hearing here about COVID lockdowns, soon to become climate lockdowns. What does that mean?
Climate lockdown is a new conspiracy that we're seeing in the anti-climate space that explicitly uses the language of the pandemic and of COVID-19 to fearmonger about a potential future of green tyranny, where governments are stripping people of their individual freedoms under the excuse of combating climate change.
And so the misinformation flows. But the effects of a warming planet are clear and intensifying, even as many seek to muddy the waters. But with the UN climate conference just around the corner, the need to separate fact from fiction, reality from falsehood, has never been more pressing.